Hello students, and welcome back to the English Danny channel. Today, I've got a new episode of Three-Way English with Dr. Don. If you like today's story, or if you want to improve your English through reading easily accessible short stories like these, check out one of my collections of stories. Each collection has 16 stories presented in the Three-Way English format, together with vocabulary building and study questions to help you self-test your understanding of English. You can find links to my story collections in the description below. Let's start the episode. Remember, with Three-Way English, I will tell you a story 3 different ways. First, in a very basic, simple way, and then twice more with increasing difficulty. The idea is to help you learn English grammar and vocabulary in context. The first time through, I will use simple present tense only. I will use simple sentence structures and speak slowly with no contractions. Today's story is called The Judge's Robes. A laundryman picks up some clothes from a local judge to clean them. He notices the judge's robes in the laundry. He can't help but try the robes on. He looks at himself in the mirror. He imagines that he looks very dignified in the robes. He walks up and down and acts like the judge. His wife comes in and sees him. She laughs at his behavior and asks him for his judgment on who can change the baby's diaper. When he doesn't answer, she asks him to decide who left the dirty clothes on the floor. When again he does not answer, she asks him for his judgment on people who leave the bathroom door open. For a third time, he is unable to say anything. The wife laughs at him and says he may wear the robes, but he is not much of a judge. Okay, now let's try the story a second time. This time, I will introduce different verb tenses, such as the simple past. I will use different vocabulary and sentence structures and speak a little faster than the first time through. A laundryman picked up a load of clothes from a local judge to clean them. He noticed that the judge's robes were mixed in with the other laundry. He couldn't help but try them on and look at himself in the mirror. He thought he looked quite dignified in the judicial robes and started striding up and down, acting like the judge himself. That's when his wife came in and saw him behaving this way. She laughed at him and asked for his judgment on who should change the baby's diaper. The laundryman didn't dare answer, since he and his wife often fought about this. So she asked him for his judgment about who left the dirty clothes on the floor. Again, the laundryman said nothing, since he was the one who had done it. Next, she asked what should be done to those who left the bathroom door open. For a third time, he was unable to speak, since he often did this very thing himself. The wife laughed at him again and told him he might wear the robes, but he couldn't really act like a judge. Now you know the story, so I'm going to do the story one more time, and this time at native level speed and with more advanced vocabulary and sentence structures. A laundryman once picked up a load of clothing from the local judge for cleaning. He noticed that the judge had included his impressive black judicial robes in with the rest of the laundry. Struck by the sight of the robes, the laundryman couldn't help trying them on and checking himself out in the mirror. "I look like quite the dignified fellow," he said to himself. He began to stride up and down in a stately manner, carrying himself the way he had seen the judge do. Just then, his wife came in and found him behaving in this manner. "Well, Your Honor," she said ironically, "do you have any ruling on who should change the baby's diaper later?" The laundryman struggled to respond, since the couple often fought over who should change the baby. "Okay then, how about determining who left his dirty clothes on the floor?" Again, the laundryman said nothing, since he knew it was he who had done this. "Well, how about your sentence for those who always leave the bathroom door open?" For a third time, the laundryman was unwilling to answer. This last issue was quite a sore spot between him and his wife. The wife just chuckled to herself. "You may wear the robes," she told him, "but you sure aren't much of a judge." The moral of this story is clothes do not make the man. Today's story is a new one called The Pig's New Friend. On a farm, a little pig becomes friends with the local dog. They play together all day, chasing each other around happily. But the pig's mother notices that the dog often scratches behind his ear. She tells her son to be careful because the dog has fleas. The pig agrees to be careful, but he does not expect to have any problems with fleas. Then, one day, the little pig and the dog play together until nightfall. Because the farmhouse door is locked, the pig invites the dog to sleep in the pigsty. The dog does so. The next morning, the little pig and his mother both wake up to find they have fleas. But unlike the dog, they are unable to scratch themselves, so the fleas bite at them terribly. Okay, now let's do the story a second time through. This time, I will use different verb tenses, such as the simple past, and I will use some different vocabulary and sentence structures. I will also speak a little bit faster than the first time through. In a farmyard, a little pig became friends with the local dog. They would play together all day, chasing each other around, squealing and barking happily. But the little pig's mother noticed that the dog often paused to scratch behind his ear, so she told her son to be careful when playing with the dog because the dog had fleas. The little pig agreed to be careful, but he ignored the warning because he didn't think the fleas would ever become a problem. Then one day, the little pig and the dog played together until nightfall. They came back home to find the farmhouse door was locked. So the little pig invited his friend to spend the night in the pigsty. The dog agreed, and they slept the night peacefully. The next morning, the little pig and his mother woke up to find themselves covered with fleas. But unlike the dog, they were unable to scratch themselves. All they could do was run through the farmyard, squealing unhappily. Now you know the story. So I'm going to do it one more time, and this time at native level speed and with more advanced vocabulary and sentence structures. In a farmyard, there was a little pig who became friends with the local dog. All day long, they would romp through the yard together, chasing each other around while the pig squealed with delight and the dog barked happily. But the little pig's mother noticed that the dog would often pause and scratch behind his ear. So she pulled her son aside and gave him a stern warning. Be careful when playing with the dog, because he obviously has fleas and they can easily find their way onto you, she told him. The little pig agreed, but as he did so, he thought to himself, I've never noticed a flea jumping onto me so far. And besides, without any hair for them to hide in, I can easily find them and wipe them away. Then one night, after the little pig and his friend had been out playing in the woods, the two friends noticed that the sun was going down. When they reached their home, the dog was surprised to discover the door to the farmhouse was locked. I suppose I shall have to sleep outside tonight, he said sadly. No problem, the little pig told him. You can sleep with my family tonight. So that night, the little dog and the pig nestled together in the pigsty. The next morning, the little pig and his mother woke up to find themselves covered with fleas. But unlike the dog, they were unable to use their little legs to scratch themselves, so they ran through the farmyard, squealing miserably. Now, the moral of this story is, if you lie down with dogs, you wake up with fleas. And the idea of this old saying is that the people you hang out with will eventually influence your behavior. So if you hang out with bad people, you will adopt some of their bad habits. If you hang out with dogs and the dogs have fleas, eventually you will also have fleas. Contractions. Today's story is called The Porcupine and the Snakes. A porcupine goes to look for a new home. He finds a little cave. A family of snakes lives in the cave. He asks them if he can share their cave with him. They agree. But soon the snakes wish they did not give permission to stay. This is because the sharp quills of the porcupine stick them at every turn. Every time they try to move, they get stuck by one of the porcupine's sharp quills. The snakes very politely ask the porcupine to leave, but he tells them that he is quite happy there. Instead, he politely leads the snakes out of their former home and tells them good day. To save their skins, the snakes have to look for another home. Okay, now let's do the story a second time through. This time, I will introduce different verb tenses, such as the simple past. I will use some different vocabulary and sentence structures, and I will speak a little faster than the first time through. A porcupine was looking for a new home one day. He found a little cave with a family of snakes living inside. He asked them if he could share their cave, and they agreed. But soon enough, the snakes came to wish they had not given him permission to stay, because at every turn they were getting stuck by the porcupine's quills. Whenever they tried to move around, they would get stuck by yet another quill. So the snakes politely asked the porcupine to leave, but he told them he was quite happy there, and instead told the snakes they should be the ones to leave. In order to save their skins, the snakes had to go looking for another home. All right, now you know the story. So I'm going to do it one more time, this time at native level speed and with more advanced vocabulary and sentence structures. Once upon a time, there was a porcupine who was searching for a new home. He came upon a little cave with a family of snakes living inside it. "Would you mind if I shared your home?" he asked them kindly. The snakes saw no reason not to have a guest, so they invited him in. But it wasn't long before they realized their error. At every turn, the snakes found themselves getting stuck by one of the porcupine's sharp quills. It seemed that whenever one of them would turn a corner, there would be a quill poking them yet again. At last, they politely asked their guest to leave. "I'm very well satisfied where I am, thank you," the porcupine told them. "I intend to stay right here." And with that, he firmly escorted the snakes out of the doors. To save their own skins, the snakes had no choice but to find themselves another home. Now, the moral of this story is give a finger and lose a hand. The idea is that with some people, if you give them a little bit, they'll end up taking more than you intended to give. Can you think of any examples of things like this from your own life? Don't forget to like and share this video if you found it helpful. Today's story is called The Tortoise and the Hare. In the woods one day, a rabbit makes fun of a turtle for being so slow. The turtle offers to run a race against the rabbit to prove his ability to get around. The rabbit agrees to run a race. He thinks a win is easy, and he can make fun of the turtle afterward. They choose a path through the woods and begin the race. Of course, the rabbit gets far ahead immediately. He gets so far ahead, he decides to take a nap by the side of the road until the turtle catches up to him. Meanwhile, the turtle is walking along in his usual slow way. He reaches the place where the rabbit is still sleeping. He walks by the rabbit, who continues to sleep peacefully. By the time the rabbit wakes up, the turtle is almost at the finish line. The rabbit runs as fast as he can to catch up, but he cannot reach the turtle in time, and the turtle wins the race. Okay, now let's do that story a second time through. This time, I will introduce different verb tenses such as the simple past. I will use some different vocabulary and sentence structures, and I will speak a little bit faster than the first time through. In the woods one day, a hare was making fun of a tortoise for being so slow. The tortoise offered to run a race against the hare to prove that, though he was slow, he always got where he wanted to go. The rabbit agreed to run the race. He thought it would be easy to win, and then he could make fun of the tortoise afterward. They chose a long, winding path through the forest and began. Of course, the rabbit took off and got very far ahead. In fact, he got so far ahead of the tortoise that he decided he would take a nap by the side of the road and wait until the tortoise caught up to him. Meanwhile, the turtle kept on moving ahead in his usual slow manner. He reached the side of the road where the hare was sleeping and passed him by. Eventually, the hare woke up just in time to see the tortoise nearing the finish line. He ran as fast as he could to catch up, but it was too late. And that was how the tortoise won the race against the hare. Now you know the story, so I'm going to do it one more time, and this time at native level speed and with more advanced vocabulary and sentence structures. In the woods one day, a hare was mocking his friend the tortoise for being such a slow mover. "Do you ever get anywhere at all?" the hare asked him, laughing. "I always get where I want to go," the tortoise told him, "even if it might be slower than you." "Prove it," said the hare. "Okay," the tortoise agreed. "Let's have a race, and I'll show you." "A race against me?" The rabbit was delighted by the idea of beating his friend in a race. "I'll win easily," he thought to himself, and taunt this fellow forever after. So they picked out a long, winding path through the forest and started the race. The hare was off like a shot, running so fast that he couldn't even see the tortoise when he looked behind him. As he neared the finish line, the hare got the idea of resting by the side of the road. "When the tortoise appears, I'll run rings around him," the hare said to himself. "I'll win this race running backwards." The hare sat down to rest and soon was fast asleep. Meanwhile, the tortoise kept on moving ahead, putting one foot in front of the other in his usual slow, deliberate fashion. He reached the spot where the hare was sleeping and calmly passed him by. As the tortoise neared the finish line, other animals in the forest started to laugh and cry out loudly, encouraging him in his victory. That noise woke up the hare, who darted after his friend as fast as he could go. But the tortoise was too close to the end for the hare to catch him. And that was how the tortoise beat the hare in a foot race. Now, the moral of this story is the race is not always to the swift. That means that speed alone doesn't decide everything. Today's story is called Belling the Cat. One day, the mice call a meeting. They talk about how to become free of their old enemy, the cat. They want to find a way to warn themselves when the cat comes. That way, they will have time to run away. The mice are so afraid of the cat that they barely leave their homes. Many plans come up, but no plan sounds good. Finally, a young mouse gets up and says, "I have a plan that seems very simple, but I know it will work. All we have to do is hang a bell around the neck of the cat. When we hear the bell ring, we will know the cat is here." Well, the mice are all very happy with this plan. But as they cheer it, an old mouse stands up and says, "I think this plan of the young mouse is quite good. But let me ask one question. Who will bell the cat?" Okay, now let's do that story a second time through. This time, I will introduce more verb tenses and sentence structures. There will be some slightly more advanced vocabulary, and I will speak a little bit faster. One day, the mice called a meeting to talk about how to become free of their old enemy, the cat. At the very least, they wanted to find a way of knowing when the cat was nearby, so they had time to run away. Many plans were discussed, but none of them were good enough. At last, a very young mouse got up and said, "I've got a plan that seems very simple, but I know it'll work. All we have to do is hang a bell around the cat's neck. When we hear it ring, we'll know the cat is coming." Well, the mice were much surprised by this plan, surprised and delighted. They all wondered why no one had thought of it before. As they were celebrating their good fortune, an old mouse got up and said, "I will say that the plan of the young mouse here is quite good, but let me ask just one question. Who will bell the cat?" All right, now you know the story. So, the third time through, I'm going to try it at something close to native level speed and with more advanced vocabulary and sentence structures. The mice called a meeting one day to discuss how they might become free of their old enemy, the cat. At the very least, they wished to discover some way of knowing when the cat was coming, so they might run away from her. Many plans were discussed at length, but no plan was thought good enough. Finally, a very young mouse rose up and said, "I've got a plan. Now, it might seem simple, but I know it'll work. We just have to hang a bell around the cat's neck. When we hear that bell ringing, we'll know she's coming." All the mice were much surprised and delighted by this plan, and they wondered why no one had thought of such a thing before. They cheered the young mouse and began celebrating their good fortune to have come up with such an idea. But in the midst of the celebration, an old mouse arose and asked, "Well, I must say, I find this young mouse's plan most excellent. So do we all. Yet I can't help but wonder, who among us will dare to bell the cat?" All right, well, the moral of this story is it is one thing to say something should be done, but it is quite a different matter to actually do it. And we could put this saying another way. Today's story is The Chicken and the Fox. One evening, a chicken rests in a tree. As she sits, a fox comes along and stands at the bottom. He asks if the chicken knows the news. The chicken says she does not. The fox explains that all the animals now agree to forget their differences and live in peace. He asks the chicken to come down to celebrate with him. The chicken agrees to come down, but as she says this, she stands up and looks off into the distance. The fox asks her what it is she sees. She tells him it's a couple of dogs. They must know the good news and want to celebrate. The fox does not listen any further. He starts to run off at once. The chicken asks him why he runs off, since the dogs are now his friends. The fox says perhaps they do not yet know the news, and he also has a very important errand to run. As he runs away, the chicken smiles to herself and goes back to sleep. Okay, now let's do the story a second time through. This time, I will introduce different verb tenses, such as the simple past. I will use some different vocabulary and sentence structures, and I will speak a little faster than the first time through. One bright evening, a wise old chicken flew into a tree to rest. As she settled in on her branch, a fox came along and stood at the bottom looking up at her. He asked if she had heard the news yet. Of course, she had not heard. So the fox explained that the animals had all agreed to forget their differences and live in peace and friendship together. He encouraged the chicken to come down, to embrace him and celebrate. While agreeing to come down, the chicken gazed into the distance as if she was seeing something approach. When asked what she was looking at, she replied that it was a couple of dogs. They must also want to celebrate the good news. Without listening to a word more, the fox began to run off. The chicken asked him where he was going, since all the animals were friends now. But the fox only replied that perhaps the dogs had not yet heard the news, and anyway, he had a very important errand to run. As the fox ran off, the chicken smiled to herself and went back to sleep, grateful to have outwitted a cunning enemy. Now you know the story, so I'm going to do it one more time. This time at native level speed and with more advanced vocabulary and sentence structures. One bright evening, as the sun was sinking, a wise old chicken flew into a tree to roost. But just as she was settling in on her branch, along came a fox, who stood at the bottom of the tree peering up at her. "Have you heard the wonderful news?" he cried in a joyful manner. "What news?" she asked. "Your family and mine and all the other animals have agreed to forget their differences and live in peace and friendship together. Isn't it great? Come on down, dear friend, and let us celebrate together." "How delightful," she said, but she spoke in an absent-minded way and craned her neck as if looking at something far off in the distance. "What is it you see?" asked the fox suspiciously. "Why, it's only a couple of dogs coming up," she explained. "They must have heard the good news." At this, the fox bounded off at once. "Where are you going?" she called after him. "Oh, perhaps these fellows haven't heard the news," he cried over his shoulder. "And besides, I have an important errand to run that I just remembered." The chicken smiled to herself as she buried her head in her feathers and went to sleep, for she had outwitted a crafty adversary. Now, the moral of this story is that the trickster can also be the tricked. This week, I'm going to have a different kind of story. This story will introduce some different vocabulary related to medicine and medical English. That seems like a useful area of English for people to learn more about this year. Okay, a doctor has 3 appointments one day. He meets 3 patients for a 1-hour consultation each. The first patient is a man with sports injuries. He has a sore back and aches up and down his legs. The doctor prescribes a pain reliever for the man's injuries and sends him to the pharmacist to pick up his medication. The second appointment is a young woman with some abnormal symptoms. A spot on her arm is itchy and inflamed. The doctor takes her temperature and finds that she has a slight fever as well. After checking her lab results, the doctor diagnoses the woman with a food allergy. He tells her to avoid certain foods and sends her to a local pharmacy for an anti-inflammatory medication. The third appointment is an older man suffering from acute pain in his stomach. The doctor does not have time to take a sample to send to the laboratory to make a precise diagnosis. The old man is in an emergency situation, so the doctor sends him to the nearest hospital. Okay, now let's do the story a second time through. This time, I will introduce different verb tenses, such as the simple past. I will use some slightly different word order and speak a little bit faster than the first time through. One day, a doctor had 3 appointments. He met 3 patients for a 1-hour consultation each. The first patient was a man with several sports injuries. He had a sore back and aches up and down his legs. The doctor prescribed a pain reliever to treat the injuries and sent the man to a pharmacist to pick up his medication. The second appointment was a young woman with some abnormal symptoms. She had a spot on her arm that was itchy and inflamed. The doctor took her temperature and found she had a slight fever as well. After checking her lab results, the doctor diagnosed the woman with a food allergy. He told her to avoid certain foods and sent her to a local pharmacy for an anti-inflammatory medication. The third appointment was an older man who was suffering from acute pain in his stomach. For this case, the doctor had no time to take a sample to send to the laboratory for a precise diagnosis. The old man was in an emergency situation, so the doctor sent him to the nearest hospital right away. Now you know the story, so I'm going to do it one more time, this time at native level speed and with more advanced grammar and vocabulary. A doctor had appointments with 3 patients one day. According to his schedule, he had to meet with each patient for a 1-hour consultation. First was a man with nagging sports injuries. He had a sore back and several aches up and down his legs. The doctor gave him a prescription for a pain reliever to soothe the pain from his injuries and sent him to a pharmacist to pick up the medication. Second was a young woman with some abnormal symptoms. There was a spot on her arm which was itchy and inflamed. After taking her temperature, the doctor found she had a slight fever as well. When the woman's lab results came in, the doctor had all the information he needed to diagnose the woman with an allergic reaction. He instructed her to avoid certain foods and sent her to the pharmacy for an anti-inflammatory medication to treat her symptoms. Last up was an older man suffering from acute pain in his abdomen. Right away, the doctor recognized the situation was an emergency, so he had no time to take lab samples or make a precise diagnosis. Instead, he called an ambulance and sent the man to the nearest hospital. Okay, well, that story introduced 20 different medicine and health-related vocabulary words. Did you catch them all? I will use simple sentence structures and speak slowly with no contractions. Today's story is The fox and the goat. A fox falls into a well one day and is not able to get out. After a long time, a goat comes by the well. The goat is thirsty. He thinks the fox is in the well to drink the water. He asks the fox if the water is any good. The fox says it is, so the goat jumps in and starts drinking. The fox jumps on the goat's back and from there jumps out of the well. The goat now realizes he is stuck and he begs the fox to help him out. But the fox is already running into the woods. He tells the goat he needs to be more cautious before he jumps into a situation he does not understand. Okay, now let's do the story a second time through. This time, I will introduce different verb tenses such as the simple past. I will use some different vocabulary and sentence structures, and I will speak a little faster than the first time through. A fox fell into a well one day and couldn't get back out again. After a long time, a thirsty goat came by looking for something to drink. The goat asked the fox if the water in the well was any good. The crafty fox replied that the water was delicious. The goat jumped in and started drinking, but at the same time, the fox jumped onto his back and then scrambled up out of the well. The goat quickly realized he was stuck and begged the fox to come help him out. But the fox was already well on his way into the woods. As he ran, he called out over his shoulder that the goat should be more cautious before jumping into situations he doesn't understand. All right, well now you know the story, so I'm going to do it one more time. This time at something close to native level speed and with more advanced vocabulary and sentence structures. One day, a fox fell into a well and couldn't get himself out again. He lay there for a long time before a thirsty goat happened by looking for something to drink. "How's the water?" the goat asked, little suspecting what a predicament the fox was in. "It's fine," the sly fox replied, "the finest in the whole valley." So the goat jumped in and started to lap up the water. But as he did, the fox leapt onto his back and from there was able to scramble up out of the well and run away. Realizing his plight, the goat cried out, "Come help me, Mr. Fox!" But the fox was already well on his way into the woods. "If you had any more sense, my friend, you would have checked more carefully before you dove in." And the moral of this story is, look before you leap. Today's story is The Dog and His Reflection. In town, a butcher goes about his work. He cuts up meat to sell to the townsfolk. As he works, a small pile of bones builds up on his table. He sees a little dog nearby and throws one of the bones to the dog. The dog happily grabs the bone and hurries home with the prize as fast as he can go. As he crosses a small bridge, he looks down and sees his reflection in the water. But the dog believes he sees another dog with another bone, a bone much bigger than his own. He doesn't stop to think about it. Instead, he drops his bone and jumps at the dog he sees in the river. He falls in with a splash, and in a moment, he has to swim to shore. He reaches the shore and looks back at the river sadly. He remembers the good bone he lost and realizes what a foolish dog he is. Okay, well, let's do the story a second time through. This time, I will introduce different verb tenses, such as the simple past. I will use some different vocabulary and sentence structures, and I will speak a little faster than the first time through. All right, are you ready? In town, a butcher was going about his work. He was cutting up meat to sell to the townsfolk. As he worked, a small pile of bones built up on the table next to him. He saw a dog playing nearby and threw one of the bones to the dog. The dog happily grabbed the bone and hurried home with his prize as fast as he could go. While crossing a small bridge, the dog looked down and saw his reflection in the water. But the dog believed he was seeing another dog with another bone, a bone much bigger than his own. He didn't stop to think about it, but instead dropped his bone at once and jumped at the dog he thought he saw. He fell in with a splash, only to find himself forced to swim to shore to save his life. When he reached the shore, he looked back at the river in sadness, remembering the good bone he had lost and realizing what a foolish dog he was. Now you know the story, so I'm going to do it one more time, and this time at native level speed and with more advanced vocabulary and also more advanced sentence structures. The town butcher was going about his work one day, cutting up meat to sell to the other townsfolk. As he worked, he steadily built up a small pile of bones on the table next to him. Seeing a dog playing nearby, the butcher decided to be friendly and tossed one of the bones to the dog. Of course, the dog snatched the bone up at once and hurried home with it as fast as he could go. While crossing over a small footbridge, however, the dog chanced to see what looked like another dog with a bone much bigger than his own. Of course, the dog was only seeing his own reflection, but in his greed, he didn't stop to think. Instead, he dropped his bone in the river and leapt at his own reflection. He fell into the deep water with a splash, but rather than catch a bone, he found himself forced to swim to shore to save his own life. After reaching the shore, the dog could only look back at the river mournfully, regretting the good bone he had lost through his own folly. Now, the moral of this story is that it is foolish to be greedy, with no contractions. Today's story is The Wolf or the Eagle. A flock of goats lives on the side of a mountain. There is an eagle who lives high above them. One day, he gets hungry and attacks one of the goats. He kills and eats the goat and finds it delicious. Every day for the next week, he kills and eats another goat. Finally, the goats get together to decide what to do about their problem. One of the goats suggests that they go into the valley and ask the wolf to protect them. Well, the wolf is unwilling at first, but the goats tell him he is strong enough to defend them from the eagle. So, finally, he agrees. The next day, the eagle comes for his meal, and the wolf surprises him. The wolf attacks and hurts the eagle so badly that the eagle decides to make his home on another mountain. But when the goats gather to thank the wolf for his work, the wolf tells them he is hungry, and in one day he kills and eats 20 of the flock, far more than the eagle. Okay, now let's do the story a second time through. This time, I will introduce different verb tenses, such as the simple past. I will use some different vocabulary and sentence structures, and I will speak maybe a little faster than the first time through. There once was a flock of goats living on the side of a mountain, with an eagle living high on the mountain above them. One day, the eagle started feeling hungry, and he decided to try out some goat meat for a change. He killed and ate one of the goats and found it delicious. Every day for the next week, he dined on another goat. After a time, the goats got together to decide what they could do about their problem. One of them suggested that they go into the valley and ask the wolf to protect them. At first, the wolf was unwilling to lend his services, but the goats convinced him that he was strong enough to defend them from the eagle. So, at last, he agreed. The next day, when the eagle came for his meal, the wolf surprised him. In the attack, the eagle was so badly injured that he decided to move his home to another mountain. But when the goats gathered to thank the wolf for his efforts, the wolf took one look at them and began licking his lips. Before they could do anything, he had fallen upon them, and in one day he had eaten up 20 of them, far more than what the eagle had ever done. Now you know the story, so I'm going to do it one more time, this time at native level speed and with more advanced vocabulary and sentence structures. There once was a flock of goats living on the side of a mountain. High above them in his eyrie, a broad-winged eagle made his home. For some time, they lived together in peace until one day, the eagle got it into his head to try some goat meat for a change. He seized one of the flock by the neck and snapped it. He made a quick meal of the poor victim and pronounced it delicious. Every day for a week, he dined on a different member of the flock. Seeing no end to the massacre, the goats assembled to debate a course of action. One of them piped up, saying, "Let's ask the wolf in the valley to help." At first, the wolf was unwilling to lend a paw in their defense, but the helpless creatures pleaded so strongly, insisting that only the wolf had the power to stand up to the eagle, so he sensed an opportunity. The next day, when the eagle came for his meal, the wolf ambushed him from behind a boulder. In the attack, the eagle was so badly wounded that he flew away before the wolf could finish him off. "I'll make my home elsewhere," he said as he flew off. "There are more mountains for me to nest on." The goats came bounding up to thank the wolf for saving them, but the wolf turned on them, baring his fangs. "Did you think I would stop once the eagle had left?" he asked them. "Now there's nothing standing in my way." Before any of the flock could respond, he fell upon them left and right in one afternoon, slaughtering dozens more than the eagle could have managed in a month. The moral of this story is you should avoid a remedy that is worse than the disease. It is a cloudy day today. It looks like rain. I put on a coat and take an umbrella from the rack next to the door. I drive into town to run some errands. I have to pay the utilities bill and buy some batteries. At 3 p.m., I pick my sister up from school and bring her home. When I get to the school, everyone is dressed for heavy rain. A storm hits while I'm at the school. My sister gets a little wet before she makes it to the car. Because of the storm, the traffic is heavy on the way home. I have to be careful to avoid an accident. On the way home, we see an accident with 3 cars at a traffic light near our street. It looks bad, but fortunately, no one is injured. Okay, now let's do it the second time through. This time I will use simple past and some other tenses and speak a little more quickly. It was cloudy yesterday. For most of the day, it looked like rain. When I went out to run errands, I put on my coat and took an umbrella from the rack next to the door. I drove into town where I paid the utilities bill and bought some batteries. At 3 p.m., I picked my sister up from school and brought her home. When I got to the school, everyone was dressed for heavy rain. The storm hit while I was waiting for my sister, so she got a little wet before she made it to the car. Because of the storm, traffic was heavy on the way home. I drove carefully to avoid getting into an accident. On the way home, we saw a 3-car accident at a traffic light. It was a bad accident, but fortunately, no one was hurt. Okay, now let's do it the third time through. Now, I'm going to change the sentence structures a little more, and this time the story will be close to native level English in terms of the speed and complexity of the language. Okay. Yesterday it was cloudy. Since it looked like rain, I grabbed my coat and umbrella from the rack when I went out to run errands. I drove into town to pay utilities bill and pick up some batteries. Around 3 p.m., I went to the school to pick up my sister and bring her home. When I got there, everyone was dressed for heavy rain. The storm hit right when my sister got out, so she got a little wet before making it to the car. Traffic was fairly heavy during the trip home because of the storm. I was driving carefully to avoid getting into an accident, but not everyone was as careful as me. At a traffic light near our house, we saw a 3-car pileup. It looked pretty bad, but fortunately, no one was hurt. Today, I'll be talking about my schedule. This video is a good companion to Teacher Sarah's recent video about the simple past. I'll be using different verbs to describe my schedule, so you will be introduced to different simple past forms in an easy-to-understand context. First time through, I will use simple present only. I will also speak slowly and without contractions or difficult idioms or phrasal verbs. Okay, so on Fridays, I wake up at 9 a.m. I take a shower and brush my teeth. Then I go to a coffee shop near my house. I drink coffee and check my email. I also write part of a script for the English Danny channel. If I have time, I read some different online forums for a little while. After my coffee, I go home and make lunch. I have sandwiches and chips with ginger ale. I eat lunch for half an hour. Then I take the dog for a walk. We wander around the neighborhood for an hour. When we get back, I feed the dog. In the afternoon, I drive across town to meet some friends. We hang out for a little while, just talking together for a bit. Then we go see a movie together. After the movie, we eat dinner at a nearby restaurant. I go home and go to bed at 11 o'clock. I read a book for a little while before I fall asleep. Okay, so that's the first time through. Now, second time through, I will use the simple past versions of the verbs from part 1. I will speak a little bit more quickly this time. And instead of talking about my schedule, I will talk about something that happened in the past. Okay. Last Friday, I woke up at 9 a.m. I took a shower and brushed my teeth. Then I went to the coffee shop near my house. I drank coffee and checked my email. I also wrote part of a script for the English Danny channel. Since I had time, I read some different online forums for a little while. After my coffee, I went home and made lunch. I had sandwiches and chips with ginger ale. I ate lunch for half an hour, then I took the dog for a walk. We wandered around the neighborhood for an hour. When we got back, I fed the dog. In the afternoon, I drove across town to meet some friends.
We hung out for a little while, just talking together for a bit. Then we saw a movie together. After the movie, we ate dinner at a local restaurant. I went home and went to bed at 11 o'clock. I read a book for a little while before I fell asleep. Okay, now the third time through. Now for this time, I will change the sentence structures a little bit and speak a little bit faster. This time through, it will be closer to a native level of expression. Okay. Last Friday, I got up around 9 a.m. I showered quickly and brushed my teeth, then went to a coffee shop near me for a little bit. I got a coffee and settled in to check my email and work on a script for the English Danny channel. Since I had some time, I read on some online forums after I finished the script. I went home for lunch after the coffee. I made a sandwich and had chips and a ginger ale along with it. Lunch took about an hour, and then I walked the dog. We just wandered around for a little while until I came back and fed her. Late in the afternoon, I drove across town to meet my buddies. We chilled together, then went to see a movie. After the movie, we grabbed dinner at a place near the theater. I went home and went to bed around 11. I had a book with me, so I read in it for a bit before I finally drifted off.
Contractions. Today's story is another fable. In English, a fable means a story which is meant to teach a moral lesson. In fables, you sometimes see talking animals who represent different human characteristics or failings. This fable is about the fox and the pheasants. One night, a fox walks through the woods. He sees several pheasants sitting out of his reach on the limb of a tall old tree. He looks around and finds an area of bright moonlight where the pheasants can see him clearly. There, he stands up and dances around. He spins and hops and jumps about. The pheasants stare at him fearfully. They can hardly even blink their eyes because they are afraid to lose sight of him. At one moment, the fox acts like he will climb the tree. At another, he falls over and lies down as if he is dead. And then he gets up and jumps around again with his back in the air. The whole time, the birds' heads are full of fear at the performance. They become dazed as they watch him. After a time, the birds become so afraid that when the fox begins his performance once more, they lose control and fall out of the tree. One by one, they fall down into the paws of Mr. Fox, and he eats them up. Okay, that was the first time through. Now, let's do the story again, but this time we will use different verb tenses and some new vocabulary. I will speak a little faster this time and use a few contractions as well. All right. One night, a fox was walking through the woods when he saw several pheasants sitting just out of his reach on the limb of a tall old tree. He looked around and found an area of bright moonlight where the pheasants could see him clearly. There, he stood up and danced around. He spun and hopped and jumped about while the pheasants stared at him fearfully. They could hardly even blink their eyes for fear of losing sight of him. At one moment, the fox acts like he might climb the tree and get the birds. At another, he falls over and plays dead. And then he jumps back up again and leaps around with his back in the air. The birds watch in amazement, dazzled and afraid. Their heads begin to whirl as they watch him. After a while, the pheasants have become so fearful that when the fox begins his performance all over again, they lose their balance and fall out of the tree. One by one, they fall right into the waiting paws of Mr. Fox, and he eats them up. Okay, so now you know the story. So this third time through, I will use some more advanced vocabulary and a few different sentence structures. I will also speak at something closer to a native level speed. And at the end of the story, I'll tell you what the moral of the story was. So wait around till the end. One moonlit evening, a fox was walking through the woods when he spied a group of pheasants sitting just out of his reach on the limb of a tall old tree. The sly fox soon found a bright patch of moonlight where he knew the pheasants could see him clearly. There, he got up on his hind legs and started dancing around. Spinning and hopping and jumping, he whirled about while the pheasants fearfully gazed on at him. They could hardly blink their eyes for fear of losing sight of him for even an instant. Now, the fox pretends to climb the tree. Now, he falls over and feigns death. Now he's back on his feet again, jumping and leaping with his back in the air. Their heads in a whirl, the pheasants watch him, at once captivated and petrified. But still, they can't stop watching for fear he might snatch them when their backs are turned. So fearful have they become that when the fox begins his show once more, they start to lose their balance on the limb. One by one, they plummet right into the waiting paws of Mr. Fox, who happily gobbles them up. Okay, now the moral of this story is that too much attention to danger may cause us to become victims of it.